Okay, so welcome to the Not Equal Summer webinar series. We're running this webinar in conjunction with the summer school on social justice and digital economy. So my name's Lizzie Coles-Kemp, and I've been working alongside Clara and Anne and Alan for the last 3 years on the Not Equal network. Not Equal is funded in the UK by UKRI to around about 1.2 million. So it's a network that's really seriously focused on exploring and creating conditions that enable social justice in digital economy. We've been having fun for the last 3 years. We've really enjoyed encouraging and supporting collaborations between academic institutions and non-academic groups, partners, networks, a whole range, 16 in total that we've supported and encouraged. We've also had all manner of different types of engagements, from small engagements, you can see some of the pictures here, to larger sort of more sustained engagements. We've also supported projects and endeavours and collaborations that have resulted in new models and processes, but also really novel explorations. I love the sheep at the bottom there. That shows you really the whole breadth of what's been going on. So today, this evening for some of us, slightly earlier on in the day for others, it's really a delight to work in this way. It's one of the few upsides of sort of working in this remote way, is that we can bring really exciting thought leaders to talk about some of their work in our area of social justice and digital economy. Today is the second webinar, and the topic is Equitable Digital Economies. The way that we're going to do this is that in a minute, I'm going to start introducing our panelists. I'll take each one in turn, and they'll do a 7-minute provocation, and we'll go through the panel, and then we're going to have a panel discussion, and open that up to the floor. We are recording because we want to enable this webinar to get as wide a distribution as possible. We know that there's a lot of interest in these topics, and that's growing, and we really want to do as much as we can to disseminate and get the word out there. So our panel, it's a real pleasure. It really is actually a huge honor to have this panel with us today. We have Tawanna Dillahunt from the University of Michigan. We've got Pitso Tsibolane from the University of Cape Town. We've got Ruth Catlow from Furtherfield, Anne Light from University of Sussex, Malmö University, and Maurizio Telli from Aalborg University. It's a really exciting, interesting, diverse panel, and I really look forward to listening with you and then engaging and creating debate. So what I'd like to do now, if I may, is go to our first panelist, Tawanna. I'm going to stop sharing and hand over. Let's just see how that goes. So let's see. Oh, right. So I'll hand it to you to get your slides ready while I introduce you, Tawanna. So Tawanna is an associate professor in the School of Information, and she works at the intersection of HCI, environmental, economic, and social sustainability and equity. Her research investigates and develops improvements to and implements technologies to support the needs of people experiencing marginalization and also historically excluded populations. And I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to hand over to you, Tawanna. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
All right. Thanks so much for the introduction. I'm honored and very excited to be with you here today. As many of you know, the nature of work has changed and is changing, and we see several technologies available to support employment and entrepreneurship. However, those with limited socioeconomic resources are less likely to benefit from these digital tools and platforms. This figure shows the proportion of recent job seekers who stated they were not confident in their ability to perform these 6 job search-related tasks online. And there is an extreme spike for those who have not attended college. The internet is a valuable resource in the job search, and even more so during the pandemic. We must ensure those with limited resources and those experiencing marginalization are not being left behind. In their Psychology of Working theory, Duffy and others define marginalization as the relegation of people or groups of people to a less powerful or included position within society. Arguably, social marginalization and oppression reduce equal access to resources and to decent work. Indeed, labor force statistics in the United States show that Black and Hispanic Americans experience higher levels of unemployment than white Americans. Black unemployment is at least twice as high as white unemployment. Those with a high school diploma or less are more likely to face unemployment, and people with disabilities are much more likely to face unemployment than those with no disability. Such disparities in their intersection with technology motivates my work. For context, most of our research has been conducted primarily in Detroit and the surrounding areas. Detroit is a city that has been experiencing economic decline for many years, in part due to the collapse of the auto industry. To work in the city, cars are a necessity. To work in manufacturing, higher education attainment is not. While manufacturing jobs have declined, we know that the number of jobs requiring a college degree has risen. So while over 80% of Detroiters have a high school degree or higher, only about 17% have a bachelor's degree or higher. 80% of the population is Black, and the poverty rate is nearly 30%, which is 3 times that of the rest of the United States. Throughout much of my work in this context and in using a variety of design approaches such as participatory design and participatory action research, field deployments and evaluation, we've asked the overarching research question: how might technologies, existing and new, better support individuals experiencing marginalization to support their employment and economic growth? Our early empirical findings show that job seekers would value tools that provide application feedback, connect them to offline resources, and specify where to obtain the skills they need for employment without requiring complex logins or stable internet access, or requires more than the use of a mobile phone. Thus, part of our research has focused on understanding how to develop tools that center the needs and capacities of job seekers while also bridging gaps in digital literacy. I don't have time to go into details, but one finding is that involving job seekers in the design process is empowering. Not only do they begin to see themselves as designers, but they also value their contributions back to their communities, something often missing from capitalistic economies. As I mentioned earlier, we also sought to understand opportunities for existing technologies to support employment challenges. Thus, we explored whether real-time ride-sharing services could mitigate transportation access challenges to work, and if working for these services could be used to mitigate employment gaps. We investigated whether real-time ride-sharing tools could be used to address transportation barriers to work. While these services offer more reliable access to transportation, they don't offer flexible modes of payments or non-digital access points, and they exclude potential riders who don't have bank accounts or smartphones with stable data plans. In a correspondence audit study with 1,006 job applications, we wanted to assess whether a set of resumes enhanced with experience driving for a real-time ride-sharing service received more callbacks than baseline resumes with an employment gap. We found no evidence that driving as a form of gig work increased the callback rates of applicants. In fact, we observed that in comparison to men, the callback rates for women slightly declined, extending past findings of online hiring biases. So while the model of sharing economy seemingly provides opportunities to job seekers when compared to the traditional labor market, our job seekers were less likely to benefit. Because many of our job seekers had given up on the employment system and were seeking alternatives such as entrepreneurship, the second half of our research explored technology's role in supporting entrepreneurship. For 4 years before the pandemic, we engaged in a participatory action research approach with 17 local tourism entrepreneurs who named themselves the Detroit Tours Collective. In our engagement with the collective, we aimed to understand technology's role in supporting their ventures and identified 2 key takeaways. First, digital platforms meant to democratize entrepreneurship assumes access to basic resources. We noticed that existing supports for digital engagement were highly digital to begin with. People were not proactively surfing the web for resources. Searching for online tutorials on how to use entrepreneurial support tools seemed counterintuitive. Platforms meant to democratize entrepreneurial activity did not consider local issues of class and race, which often made participating on these platforms unnecessarily difficult. And finally, low-tech social supports were necessary for supporting early-stage business progress online and offline. Many times this was needed to help entrepreneurs get their businesses up and running. COVID-19 interrupted the tourist collective and forced community members onto the technological platforms they previously required social support to use. Thus, building on the notion of a collective and social support, we're currently piloting what we're calling a community tech workers program, a community-driven model that trains lay individuals to provide digital support to community members. This model employs local community members, trains them with tech skills, and fosters digital capacity to others in their community. The model eliminates the need for transportation. Going forward, our aim is to continue building on assets-based models like the Detroit Tourist Collective and the community tech workers to elicit other core values that entail alternative economies. Using speculative co-design with our community partners, we ask, what are the imagined economies and what is technology's role in supporting these economies? I'm looking forward to discussing your insight into our direction going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tawanna. That was just great. So many questions, and I think it's a really great way to start to start this session. Thank you. I'd like to now move to Pitso, and I'll introduce you, and then perhaps you can get your slides up and running while I do that. Delighted to welcome our second speaker, Pitso Tsibolane from the University of Cape Town. Pitso is a senior lecturer in the Department of Information Systems. His broad research interests lie at the intersection of technology, culture, and labor. His research focuses on how societies outside the dominant European and North American metropole interact with digital technology through development lenses that center on their ways of being and voice. Delighted to welcome you here, and I shall now hand over to you.
So hi and good evening, everyone. My name is Pitso Tsibolane, and as I've been introduced, I come all the way from the University of Cape Town. That's where I'm South African. This is home, and this is where I work from. And it is really an honor for me to be here. And I, as part of what I do on a daily basis, as a lecturer, researcher, and many other things at the university, I also am part of the Fair Work Project. Now, the Fair Work Project is a multinational project spanning many different countries and keeps growing. And what we are really all about, in a nutshell, is really to try to understand how fair and how beneficial and how decent is the work that digital platforms, especially digital labor platforms, offer for people. And of course, our interest, being people of the global South, is to really understand how people of the global South are faring compared to everyone else in this new ways of work. And we have found quite interesting things so far, and we would like to keep doing this type of work and keep sharing and just trying to understand how everyone's doing. So today, I just want to focus on a small little aspect of what we do. And I have entitled my talk today, "It Feels Like Slavery All Over Again." It is a provocation, and I hope the audience receives it as that. But where does this come from? This is actually a direct quotation that came out of a discussion or an interview discussion that we had with an Uber driver in South Africa. You see, a Zimbabwean a gentleman who, out of necessity has found himself in South Africa, and he finds himself, driving for Uber. And when we were asking and trying to find out from him, really trying to get, under the whole, discussion about, how fair is this work? How beneficial is it to you? The thing that he said, which struck us, was this feels like slavery all over again. Of course, this is not everything that he said. This is just one of those quotations that came out of it. But what he was trying to share with us is that I am grateful to have a job. I am grateful to find myself part of this, new platform which enables me to do the things that I was unable to do before. In Zimbabwe, where I come from, you know, my struggles and the collapse of the government there, and I'm here and I'm trying to make a new living for myself. And I'm finding myself instead, you know, getting something out of this, but at the same time feeling like somehow this is not the way things should be. It seems to me like this new way of work requires me to work much longer hours than I would. It has compromised me, and I've had to do illegal things, you know, such as like identity cloning and things like those, just to survive in this way of doing work. I've had to moonlight and do multiple jobs all at the same time in order for me to be able to just live. Right? So the idea is that these platforms, these new ways of work, are all evil or terrible, or they are enslaving people, like the provocation is trying to say. But what it's saying is, what do we think about fairness and treating everyone in the same way? We have many cases of Uber Eats drivers who themselves cannot afford food. Right? We have cases of Uber drivers who are unable to make a living even after having worked for 18-hour days, sometimes 24-hour days, just to try to make the payment for the rental of the car that they are using. And they're facing a whole lot of other precarities that are usually associated with the global South economic situation. In South Africa, we've got a high levels of violence that is directed towards Uber drivers, for instance, and there's a lot of violence and fighting for routes or routes, you know, between the traditional taxi industry. All of these things, it's almost as if no one cares that the Uber workers have to face and have to deal with. And we keep asking ourselves, what is behind this? What makes this to be possible, that we are giving people this way and we are branding it as this new way of work? Well, there's many reasons why perhaps this is the reason, and many people have opined and theorized about what's driving this new way of doing work and a new way of doing life that seems to be so so unfair, so not decent, but we seem to be doing it. We are all using Uber Rise, and we are all using Uber Eats, and we all using all these gig workers who come to clean our houses and do all of these things. Why? And we think that there is something to be said about the ideals of the digital society and the idea of this new gigified and datafied and very isolating environment that these platforms tend to be allowing and creating. The idea that workers can be independent in an instant, and therefore they do not need to be unionized, and therefore they do not, they must see themselves as entrepreneurs, when all they're really looking for is a job. And we're forcing them into this myth of entrepreneurial spirit where people, cannot complain, but they must just work. And this is how entrepreneurs do it, when the real entrepreneurs themselves are actually not doing the hard work that these people are doing from afar. There's the myth about the fourth industrial revolution, and it's quite big in the global South, particularly in South Africa. The idea that there's this new golden century where there's going to be huge productivity boom for everyone, and everyone must get themselves into this world. All of these ideas, the big data revolution, smart cities and smart planet, all of these myths are being created in part by our politicians, but also by the world of technology. Technology professionals themselves are creating this myth and setting up people for a big surprise when they start entering into it, and they are experiencing isolation, oppression, discrimination, gendered ways of relations. They are experiencing a lot of problems that tend to get overlooked because they're getting paid, and they must be thankful as a result. So we are very interested in getting to the bottom of this and really trying to understand it. So lastly, this is what we are trying to advocate for. If we are going to have a better world, promised future of work, which happens to be driven by all this wonderful, algorithms that have been built, this new, engines and engines, that are supposed to help us to have predictive power and to do things better and more efficiently. We only ask for simple things. And if these principles could be part and be embedded as part of what the future of work should have, then we are making some progress. And that's why, as a result, we have decided to go into this world of the gig economy and digital platforms and to rank and score and expose some of these infractions wherever they happen. We ask, are people being paid fairly? And there's a whole lot of things that we look at. Are people being given fair conditions, particularly in COVID-19, when the COVID pandemic hit? Gig workers were left on the ledge. They were, particularly in the global south, they were left to carry the burden of people isolating, and they were the only ones running around in the street, exposing themselves to the thing, this big thing that no one knew what it was, and they had to carry it, and people had to be fair. So we need to ask also, are their contracts fair? These are surprisingly, these 5 principles: fair management, fair representation. These are very basic, simple principles that anyone who works anywhere should be able to answer very easily. And what we are finding is that our digital platforms fail to even answer some of these basic principles. So as a result, we are asking everyone, as we are thinking and theorizing about the future of work, the new world, and these digital platforms that are creating opportunities, can we answer these 5 basic things, and can we make work more decent? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pitso. That was another great provocation. Certainly, lots for us to think about. I'd like to now move on, if I may. It's always I want to stop and ask questions, but I can't. So what I shall do now is move on now to our next panelist, Ruth Catlow. And Ruth, if you could. You don't have slides, so we're going to go slideless in a minute, which is great to have that in the middle. And Ruth Catlow is co-founder, artistic director of Furtherfield, and is a network cultures expert. Her artistic practice and curatorial work at Furtherfield has focused on a critical investigation of digital and network technologies and their emancipatory potential. So Ruth, if I could hand over to you.
Thank you so much. What an honor it is to be here. I feel like I'm taking a slightly zoomed out view on this question, and from a slightly different perspective on the kind of collaborative economies, specifically associated with explorations in new decentralized financial technologies and their relation to kind of governance and decision making. So since 1996 at Furtherfield, we've initiated experiments in artistic co-creation with artists, techies and activists across digital and physical networks. And from venues online and in Finsbury Park, where our gallery is, we rethink life in a world of advanced technologies. So just to give you a sense of this, Finsbury Park is based in North London. It's a park used by people who speak 200 different languages. And there are kind of multiple diversities at work, at highly migrant populations. And so our work has been to find new ways to connect with the users of this park and networks of kind of exploratory artist and techie researchers to work out what is important and what we need to be understanding, engaging with as new technologies are constantly emerging. As an artist who grew up with the web in the 90s, I have come to consider myself a recovering net utopian. So I've kind of been constantly fascinated with the emancipatory potential, especially the promise in the mid-90s of decentralization technologies that would allow us to organize in new ways. but really learnt the hard way about hazards and limits, and also the tendencies of networks to accelerate and amplify inequality. And I think we're hearing some of this already in the brilliant talks we've heard today. Our intention at Furtherfield is to create context for diverse interests and cultures to shape decentralization technologies that will impact all of our lives into the future. Just specifically, since 2019, our Decentralized Arts Lab has explored the potential for blockchain technologies in relation to freedoms, fairness, and solidarity in the art world, and really looking beyond the potential for financial speculation and money laundering. And this was built on a program called Art Data Money, that was a kind of program of exhibitions, labs, and publications that asked how we might build a commons for the arts in the networked age and in the age of big data. And just one last peg so you can kind of get a sense of how we've come to where we've come to. In 2017, we published a book with talk editions called Artists Rethinking the Blockchain that kind of built on what we'd learned together with our networks of artist techies, but also from our grounded community in London. So why the blockchain and why the art world? Well, first, let's not assume, I'm just going to do a baseline, like what blockchain? What is blockchain? So I think if we think about the World Wide Web as the internet of messages, we can understand the blockchain as the internet of money and governance. So it's a kind of internet with money baked in, or kind of financial technologies baked in. And there are all kinds of like quite mind-bending political consequences to conceiving of an infrastructure for money and governance that acts independently from states and banks. And so why the art world? Well, the art world's really got a problem. So while it garners great wealth, like artists and even the world's wealthiest cities really struggle to make even a basic living. And this is to do with the relationship. There's this kind of awkward relationship between the value of arts to society and how it's resourced. And this kind of resonates across all kinds of other productive human labor, I think. And of course, arts in common with blockchain has this problem as a kind of vehicle, as a vehicle for speculation and money laundering. So together, the blockchain and arts provide a kind of powerful context to carry out critical experiments. And this is, I think, because of the relationship between art, value, and money, the tension in the art world between relational work and the commodification of artwork, and also artists' engagement with self-organizing and infrastructural critique. So I think for these reasons, I think it's revealed a really kind of strong range of practices and some important work is kind of coming up in this field. We've been developing a number of projects ourselves at Furtherfield, including actually one from the Not Equal, funded through Not Equal. So this was a project called Algorithmic Food Justice, in which we used live action role play to look at what decentralized technologies might bring to a community city farm based in London. Another project, it's helpful sometimes to have examples, is Culture Stake. So this is a project we're testing and launching this summer, which is a web-based voting system that uses quadratic voting on the blockchain to allow everyone to vote on the types of cultural activity they would like to see in their locality. And we have a number of other projects that are kind of testing some of the kind of rhetoric and claims that are made for blockchain technologies around the potential for new kind of emancipatory decision-making and decentralized governance. At the core of this is a kind of shared understanding that we need to move away from small groups of experts making decisions for large groups of people towards large groups of people working together as cultural communities. And the art world and beyond needs new ways to distribute power and autonomy to more diverse people and beings, and to nurture systems of healthy interdependence. And so for us, we see that the value of having artists working in these tech spaces means that kind of along with our commons inspirations like Elinor Ostrom and Silvia Federici, it allows us to put culture before structure and to allow us to kind of really work through some of the kind of, the hazards basically of these decentralized technologies by working them through with grounded communities and seeing what value and what dangers they might hold.
Thank you. It's just fascinating, and I think really struck there by the breadth. So we look forward to digging into that more in the panel. As always, I must move on, but lots of questions. Thank you so much, Ruth. If we could now move to Anne Light. Anne is Professor of Design and Creative Technology at the University of Sussex, and she's also Professor of Interaction Design, Social Change and Sustainability at Malmö University. Anne's work addresses themes of social and ecological justice, the co-making of futures and the politics of design. She specialized in participatory practice in the social impact of technology and brings together multiple disciplines, HCI, the arts, design, into these conversations. And Anne, I'm going to hand over to you if I may.
Thank you. And I'm going in another direction, but I think very much based on what we've been hearing about some of the problems with what's emerging as kind of network economy or network economics. For many years, I've looked at what happens when you scale technology, but you don't necessarily take consideration of place and a sensitivity to people's practices with you. And then you just get something that's very totalizing and something which has the ambition to become a monopoly. And we see that the tools of the sharing economy, for instance, have done that. And I've heard very eloquently from Tawanna and Pitso about the awful impacts that that can have on people. But my work has very much gone in a different direction, and it's tried to find small spaces of what Davina Cooper might call everyday utopias, or something that's happening now that could promise something better to come. And I'm trying out these ideas at the moment, and the idea of how do we not just have different economies, but actually design economies to be transformative. So I'm just going to put a promise of something that could be different. Eco-social justice requires a redistribution of resources and capabilities, and then talk about what's motivating this to some extent is that we need now, because we're in a state of of drama, shall we say, not just in developing regions which have been in a state of drama and go on rolling through because of historical eventualities and colonialism, but now a state where actually if the world doesn't pull together and we don't stop totalizing things and alienating ourselves from place, we're in a much more parlous situation than we were even 50 years ago. So here I'm quoting Gibson Graham, who've done a lot of work on alternative economies, and they're talking about the diverse exchanges, labor and surplus appropriations that involve rivers, soil profiles, animals, biota, minerals and atmospheres that contribute to economic well-being. And the task being now to look at those kinds of contribution and recognize that we need to be thinking in bigger ways and also smaller ways. So I'm going to come on to that. Specifically, I'm going to talk about a very small but very successful moment that's just happened off the coast of Sussex near where I live. And partly because it's really important that we improve fishing stocks, partly because there was a whole world underwater till the 1970s, just on the Sussex coast, these marvelous kelp forests that were completely wiped out by trawler fishing. And there has now been, after a 3-year campaign, the opportunity to ban trawling, but by law locally to ban trawling and see what can be regrown. And I think this is a wonderful example of a transformative economy. So I'm going to call them a class of project that knowingly works to create new economic relations between different life forms and material. And I'm contrasting that very much with these unscrupulous venture-funded monopolies. So it's looking at changing resources so that resources are better understood and cared for better and better apportioned, designed to bring about eco-social change, and also holding the means to make the change within. So this is a campaign called Help Our Kelp. And you can see already that there were a lot of online presence, there were films, there were logos, there were maps. And I was interviewing one of the fisheries and the local fisheries departments in the civil service. And he was saying that normally when you're trying to change a bylaw, you get about 5 or 10 people expressing an opinion. But because of the energy that they put into this, they actually had several thousand people, and enough pressure was brought to mean that actually the, now I'm going to get it all wrong, but the Department of Environment, Agriculture and Fisheries actually responded by changing the legislation. So this is what it is, but very much an online campaign, something that was mobilizing local people, but using technology and also inspiration. And one of the things that they credit it with was being able to demonstrate that there is a world underwater which we don't see, and involving David Attenborough to narrate. Off our coast, there are magical underwater forests. So making this connection between what we experience on land and what we don't experience underwater as a place that sustains thousands of different life forms. And they've done it by championing the bylaw, bringing together key players and preparing work streams where they're going to look a lot at data, and I'm sure that will use a lot of technology. But what I found interesting also is that one of the partners is actually a media company which makes films. So here we have something where completely built into the system is this idea that it needs to be both a physical campaign and something which can win hearts and minds. So this is the company, and they do a lot of that kind of work. Now, one of the reasons that I've linked it to relational assets, so that's the transformative economies, is that when we start to work in this kind of way, all kinds of new connections get born. Most of my work in this area has been done with colleagues looking at how we share in place. But I was interested to try and expand that to see whether the principles that we were finding there would stretch, whether you could actually develop a rich culture and then use that as a way of thinking differently about people's confidence levels to actually take risks and try and campaign and try something new and try and create an economy or just a small shift in initiatives to see what's possible. And we found that actually it becomes a virtuous spiral that promotes pro-social values. So if you get a few people doing something and then it builds, and then you start to have a whole lot of different initiatives possible. And I've been looking at that very much as something that happens in place rather than belonging to specific people. And now trying to find examples beyond the ones that I know and in different kinds of spaces. So just to finish, some principles of the kinds of ways that we could use technology differently then, which are still network technologies, but actually being used to develop small initiatives that support growth of different relations, growth of different sharing resources better, working to develop capabilities in an area. And the areas that I was originally looking at, I wouldn't say this for Sussex particularly, but the areas that we started with were very mixed. And we saw that there was an opportunity for everyone could benefit. Not everybody benefited equally, but we know about that. So what can we do? We can understand and harness the potential of technology, which might need its own work within that community, managing sharing practice and sharing out the work and the gain, planning for trust to deepen and spread, making participation with relative strangers meaningful so that people come together and do more work together, connecting to other services and agencies, proliferating ideas as we've just been seeing, and evolving management to include new actors and their contributions so that people are actually being skilled up locally. And that's enough from me.
Thank you very much, Anne. And I'm really struck as I listen to all of these, what a rich set of directions and provocations that we have. And I'd like to, if I may, go to our final panelist to sort of complete the set. So Maurizio, if I could sort of get you warmed up as we set up. So this is delighted to welcome Maurizio Telli, an associate professor in the Department of Planning at Aalborg University. He works in interdisciplinary context, focusing on the political dimensions of the production and use of digital technologies. He's developed ethnographic sensibility that's now extended to include digital methods in order to study the development of software and for the participatory design of digital technology. So Maurizio, if I may hand over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. No, it's flattering to be the last one in this wonderful panel so far. I hope I will be up to the job because I'm taking a different approach myself. Other than thanking for the invitation, or in this speech, I just use the concept of, in the title, the concept of thought, because what I'm asking you is, is to follow me a little bit in the reflexive path I entered a few years ago to get to actually use expression like beyond capital in my work. That was something that I was doing. Indeed, if you have looked for me, you could find that I have a book co-authored with two dear colleagues, David Aken and Barbara Andrews, that is actually called Beyond Capital on Commons Computing and the Search for a Viable Future. But that was not my long-term research interest. That I came to that in my PhD that was completed 8 years before the book. I actually was doing completely other stuff, and then I work outside academia and so on. So it's been kind of bumpy roads, but fascinating from many point of view. At least I enjoyed it. And the point was was what happened that has basically brought me to that, and what does it mean for my research and practice now. This is what I want to share with you. What happened, first of all, was the economic and financial crisis of 2007 and 2008. That for many is in the past, but for me was exactly when I was submitting my dissertation. And at the time also meant cuts to university funds in Italy, where I am from. That was basically transforming the future I had worked for, that was a research career, from a family in which I was the first university graduate in my father family. This possibility became immediately impossible. That was what happened there. And in that moment, my personal experience and my political position as a precarious researcher finishing his PhD, and my professional profile in terms of research topic try to slowly converge in a long process toward actually questioning capital and capitalism for a few reasons. First, I was in the right humus. So that is, I think, is important, because I was in the right humus where the idea that the personal is political was very strong. I was surrounded by friendship with a lot of feminist scholars, for which this expression is as old as me, is probably older. And the second thing is that one of the slogans of the social movement called the Economies wave, that was challenging the cuts to higher education, was exactly the idea that the future was stolen from us. So the idea of losing a future was not only a personal experience, but was a collective one. And finally, in this reflection at the moment, I was actually teaching participatory design. That was something I was doing, but was not my core research topic. And I was co-teaching this course with my friend and colleague, Vincenzo D'Andrea. And we decided to actually try to change what we could control. That was the course. And we changed it in a way to give the students the means to shape the course. And completely, we started discussing the entire syllabus with them since day one, basically. And so in that specific moment, why I'm saying that, in that specific moment, the personal, the political and professional aspects were on one side, showing the effects of what now I will call the command of capital and austerity. But on the other side, the same personal, political, and professional relations were pointing out on what alternatives could be built. It was actually leaving those relations at a personal, political, and professional level. I could question what has been defined capitalist realism. So the idea that it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. But actually looking at the smiles, hope, and even the anger of all the people at the time, I started doubting that capitalism could not be questioned. And so I started questioning it. And but what does it mean for now? Now what I'm doing is that I'm orienting my research interest on what seems to be seen in the future for the majority of humankind, like the ecological crisis, and also some ways of doing technologies like known as artificial intelligence. In particular, I look at the role of capitalism in relation to this topic, and these topics, and we can find very good arguments on how organizing life as in contemporary capitalism is hardly compatible with environmental and social sustainability. But the real challenge is to understand how arguments developed, like here in philosophy, also Silvia Federici has already been mentioned, arguments developed in philosophy or in environmental history can actually be translated into meaningful concepts for the design of digital technology. So I do design projects. I'm now working on AI and machine learning with machine learning colleagues. And I've been working on platforms and so on. So, but the idea is how, for me, the point is how do I translate these concepts that gives us a sense of the world into actually actionable way of thinking in designing technology. And so this is for setting the agenda to what influence the future is one thing. The other thing I do, and this is where participatory design has become fundamental for me, is that there are already a lot of people and social movements and organizing and mobilizing that actually question capital and capitalism in relation to the ecology and digital technologies. And so for me, that means basically to take the back seats and work with them and bring the contribution I can bring from my position as a researcher, as an academic, but they are driving the direction. Is more supporting forces already at play more than coming up with new ideas. So in line with this tradition of participatory design, I'm actually convinced that this is also a very good research strategy, because conceptual and technological novelty come exactly from the relations that with the ones that are already experimenting and doing a lot of surprising and incredible things. That also, I should stress it, also means to contribute to the academic debate in a way that remember to the ones who have been doing it, that PD is not only participatory design, is not only a set of methods, but is actually a strategy to live with the conflicts we are part of. And finally, one of probably the concept that I'm working more with now is the concept of commoning. And this is an example because this concept is not only academic, in fact, it's more a concept adopted by social movements the social movements I was talking about before than an academic one. And I find it particularly interesting because it allows to focusing on a set of practices that are the practices of establishing and maintaining democratic governance on a resource or a production process. So it can help us look at technologies as what we actually control or what we use to democratically control something else. Looking at the practices of collective governance, the concept of commoning help us to question some epistemological assumptions that are common in technology making, like assumptions on the individuals, assumptions on established criteria, what is efficient or what is efficacy, and also conventional framing of social relations that we're being immersed on. And moreover, this is the real conclusion of thinking in terms of organizing life differently from private property or state control. That is what commoning point to. The concept of commoning can actually help us question existing institutional arrangement and also trigger processes of imagination and actually imagining what can seem impossible. That is, to go beyond capital. And yeah, and I finished.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Wow. That's 5 really excellent, thought-provoking provocations. I'd like to thank everybody very much for producing that and helping to bring that together. What I'd like to do, we're going to have a discussion as a panel, but before I do that, sort of play back how I would put these 5 provocations together. There are lots of ways that we could do this, but just to sort of start, I thought that the first to Tawanna and Pitso just really brought home the implications of getting this wrong, of the real drama, but also the pain and the continued suffering if we continue down the route that we're on. And I thought that was really the number of the points, but also what we might think to do differently. Ruth, I was really struck by these really very different types of interventions that really work with how technology in practice, how we might imagine and how we might work together across communities to experiment and work with different ways of organizing, different ways of engaging. And Anne and Maurizio, I was just blown away by this idea of utopias and daring to imagine different. And I think that's so powerful. But in very, very different ways. So what I'd like to do as the chair facilitator is ask a question, and then we'll get into discussion. And we've also had some great questions in chat and Q&A that I'd like to bring out. So please keep adding those. But what I'd like to ask the panel, if I may, is what's the one thing? Where's the one thing that you would start? And I know there are so many things, but if we could just go with the one thing, to pick up this point that Pitso raised, that the ideals of digital society are really off kilter. They're not decent, they're not fair, they're not just. So if you were to think of the one thing, could I just ask a horrible question? What is the one thing? And then from there, we can go into discussion. Who would like to start? Or do we? Anyone like to? Ruth, go ahead. Yes.
I think we need to start with a principle of care first and profit second, or maybe even further back. I think centering care would be like, if we were genuinely to do that, we would start to put a lot of things right very quickly.
Fantastic. Thank you. Who'd like to?
Yeah. So yeah. Let me just try that. Just thinking about it, I had a chat with a fellow researcher from Chile, and we were talking about what they're doing differently, and that's global South, people, and both of us were drawn to this idea of what in most South American countries they'll call buen vivir. And then I said to them, oh yeah, what you're saying sounds to me like what we in the most sub-Saharan Africa we call Ubuntu. Right. These are the two sort of ideas, and we were thinking, these are ideas that are almost in modern society are kind of like marginalized on their own. They're looked down at, they're nebulous. No one knows what they really are. You guys don't really know what you're talking about. It just sounds like this airy fairy thing. And we were saying, how do we this thing that sits, that's so embedded in so many of us, how do we bring it forth? And I don't know, when you asked the question, that's the first thing that came to my mind. I thought, how do we make the world a better place? How do we think of living well? And how do we think of humanness? How do we take this fast-paced world into this frame of mind of saying I am because my fellow humans are, and my being is directly related to their wellness, and I will never be well if they're not well. And I suppose it sort of it resonates with what Ruth has just said. We need to be thinking in this way. For us, talking to him and talking across thousands and thousands of kilometers apart, we were thinking about this one similar thing. So maybe I would just like to throw it out there, and I know I'm not doing justice to the idea because I'm not explaining what it is, but I think people know somehow, everyone, and this is it's not a global South idea. This is a humanity idea. It's something that connects all of us, that we are interdependent. And if COVID hasn't reminded us, shocked us into this realization that we only left with ourselves to blame. If we end up with a worse world or worsening world, it's because we are ignoring the obvious signs.
Thank you so much. Maurizio, I think you have your hand up.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, because Pitso gave me the great thing. I think I agree with what has been said. Absolutely. But if I need to take one thing, at least one thing I care about, is if we are nurturing the capacity that in Chile they will start a new project, CyberSeeing. Are we building the capacity to be so ambitious? To think about the infrastructure for the society of Buen Vivir or Ubuntu of care. This is the question. This is what I will start asking myself this question. Are we are there capacity around to have the ambition like CyberSeeing, to rethink that you can engage with a transformative project on that scale, and hopefully without a golpe. And but yeah.
Thank you.
I agree with what everyone has said. Ruth on centering care, definitely fits with the Ubuntu principles. I found myself reviewing principles and reading that work. I'll echo what one of my colleagues says. My colleague Professor Ron English is not being extractive and being generative, right? Like, how do we contribute back to the earth, right? Like, we're not in a good place right now environmentally, and we, if we're going to look at a single problem, we should, ask ourselves, how are we making this, this world a better place for, future generations? Will there be future generations? I mean, I think that's, one question, but, a question that I always tend to, consider is, who are we not considering? Who are we not hearing from? And center them.
Well, that's a hard one to follow, because I absolutely agree. And I was teaching just the other day about these small initiatives where people came together in villages and small communities to make a difference. And my students were very skeptical about the impact that could have worldwide. But then they began to realize that those people actually started to realize they had agency and that they could achieve things, and that they weren't going to take other things lying down. And that really changed how the students regarded it. And then they suddenly thought, actually, if everybody was doing that, then all the practices that we don't like would disappear, because bottom up would just put pressure on top down and things would change. So I think my one thing would be that every community is getting caring and getting bolshy.
Love that word, bolshy. Excellent. Caring and bolshy. That's a fantastic combination. Thank you so much. So to then sort of press on, we've had a question in the chat that came in after Tawanna's talk, but I think it actually fits across the piece. How do we, if we're going to engage and we're going to work bottom up, and we're going to make sure that the unheard or the unvoiced are voiced, that we create those spaces. And if we use technology for that, the question that came in is, how do you overcome the difficulties of working with people with different levels of technological literacy? And I suspect you've all got views on that, but Tawanna, as this was originally for you, if I could go to you and then open it up, that would be great.
Sure. I mean, we meet people where they are and remind them that we all bring in our own unique strengths. So there's a lot of fear around, technology with a lot of populations that we work with, and, letting people know that, hey, you got this, right? Like, it might, it's going to take some time. Some things that we've done is we realize that, people just don't go on Facebook and, type the name of their business. They want to write it on paper first. So create the scaffolds for people to write it on paper first, if that's where they are, so that when they go to the site, or if they need to go to the site, they can do that, right? It could be about, connecting people. Some people are like, I really don't care about social media. I don't want to do this. Okay, let's find someone who loves to do this, right? Who has a strength, and let's connect. So I say, meet people where they are, and be nimble, adapt, be patient.
And is that something that you find that the students and researchers that you nurture through this process, do they take to that naturally, or is that quite scary to start that in that way?
I think I've been lucky in that my students are great, right? Like, in terms of working with people with varying tech, capabilities. I talked about this community tech workers program, and I have, one master student who talks on the phone and walks, people through it, and they engage, they have conversations, and they talk through it. And we just finished our last kind of community tech workers huddle or training. And I mean, just the difference, now someone can log into Zoom alone, whereas before, one of us would need to go and help out. And it's just recognizing that, progress, celebrating that progress, and knowing, we're all in different places. She'll be great at, teaching someone else how to use technology herself. She'll be better at communicating than, others. But I think we've been lucky that we just had a great set of students. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. Does anyone want to add to that? Anyone want to add their experiences of working with community different levels. Yes, Pitso.
Yeah, so I possibly come from a place where, this whole gap of skills is most vivid, right? I work with communities, well, I come from communities where the level of digital literacy is very, very, it ranges from non-existent, low, and probably averages at average. The highest is like an average. Community people that just haven't experienced social economic empowerment, and they just are battling through, while at the same time I am also part of this world that is very technologically driven. I study technology and I'm part of it. And I constantly have to, we're heading towards our winter break. I'm going back to visit my father. He can't use a computer. He can't, this year I'm actually bringing him, a device. I'm sharing with him one of my own devices so that I can have video talks with him, because I can't see him as often as I would like to, because I'm still not vaccinated. So the idea that comes to me is this whole idea of digital empowerment, and that's the work that still has to be done in many parts for billions of people on Earth. And sometimes I think as we power through, to Mars and make space tourism a thing, as we do all of these things, we need to be thinking at the same time about, first of all, how we relate to all this, this planetary bodies, and how we take care of them. There's already talks of, insane amounts of space pollution. So as we do all of those wonderful things, we need to also be thinking of some of the basic stuff. How do we make sure that people are digitally empowered? How do we make sure, and how do we build it into this massive, a wheel that's pushing forward? How do we build in simple things like digital literacy? How do we teach people, and how do we take them through? And how do we give them access to these things? And not just access as in, okay, we've just rolled out fiber in this, in this farming community, and then we've left. And then people are like, where is the fiber? Like, what is fiber? And these types of things happen, so I'm a researcher within the ICT for D space, ICT for development. And, some of the most amazing projects happen, where people go and build telecenters in poor areas and they just leave them there. And people are, as soon as they leave, people take those computers, shelve them aside, and they, they take the space. It's, it's a shelter. Those types of things, we need to be aware of them and take them as things that have to be done in order for us to see to realize it. Because if we don't, and we have these billions of people left behind that are not digitally equipped, that don't have the most basic digital capability, the dream of a digital society is a farce, and they will drag us back to reality one day, and things will come crashing down, because they will say, who is this for? And who is it there to benefit? And those questions come up, we can already see them. So yeah, I'm a big proponent of digital empowerment in its entirety, and thoughtful ways of empowering digitally excluded people, not just poor people, but disabled people as well. We need to be thinking of all these facets. And it sounds like a lot of things to worry about. But if we don't, it can only turn out bad for us in the end. So we need to take everyone up with us as we go up.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a lot to reflect on there, but it is about that study. And I was thinking then, Ruth, with your statement of care first, profit second, Pitso makes this really powerful argument that ultimately for our collective well-being, we need to work for the benefit and the inclusion of everybody. How can we get that message? How can we be effective activists to get that message across, do you think? What for you has worked particularly well in getting this message to land?
I mean, there's no, I certainly have no silver bullet, but I do have, like, we've taken a number of different runs at it in different ways. And I think for me, most recently, the most powerful project that we have been involved in is a project called the Hologram, which is a peer-to-peer feminist healthcare project, which looks at a kind of bottom-up system of building communal health that's based on the expertise that we have between us, and that really centers care. It's essentially a feminist project, so it's centering care and living systems over all other concerns. And through these, so what's so powerful about it? What's so powerful about it is that it's doing these very small shifts in the kind of social relations it builds, and that in itself is very subversive. And because it puts care at its center, so because its participants are actually caring for each other, and they're finding new ways to do that are essentially very anti-capitalist. And because it's a project that spreads itself, it has a kind of viral mechanism just in the way it's structured. It makes these kind of subversive changes to its participants that then spreads into the world in new ways. And it uses tech, but it doesn't have to. But I think it's been quite interesting to see the way, like, because this project really grew up in the pandemic, like all of us have really had to learn how to support people in tech, but also how hard tech is on the body. Like this platform especially, the platform Zoom is very hard on the body, and very hard on the body when you're trying to do complex political personal work. You know, it's the kind of communication, the difference between trying to communicate about hard things with people that you don't know in a platform like this, like the level of energy it takes is a lot greater than it would be if we were together in the same room. Yes, so essentially a project that centers care as part of its narrative is the example that I give. But I think that there are many, many ways that this happens, and often projects that they don't have to be talking about care. It's very often the way in which things are done, like making things accessible to people who wouldn't ordinarily have access to it, is also really important. And thinking about how to center marginalized voices, also super important. So I think there's just a whole mass of ways to come at this.
That's really, I think this examples by doing, by showing, by engaging, but also this really important point that this is also hard on the body. It's hard on the body and hard on the mind. And limiting, I think, is such an important thing to acknowledge. And do you want to come in?
Well, I was going to comment on the fact that being part of Not Equal, I think, has made us particularly aware of how the pandemic hit and resulted in a lot of people finding themselves digitally excluded. And then the kind of measures that had to be taken kind of just in communities to be supportive of each other, and how they have failed in places, and particularly in areas where the resourcing is, of course, less, because that's how it often goes. And it took me back to some research that we did many years ago when I was working at Sheffield Hallam University in South Yorkshire on 24-hour carers and what their needs were. And at the time, people were trying to make them a little kind of tablet app that would allow them to access more resourcing digitally, as they were not, sort of connected, as the idea was at the time. And what we learned was that actually didn't matter what kind of app you put in front of them at that point. They were very busy, they had other priorities, and it was about working very carefully to customize something for those individuals and be supportive of them and give them the time and space to actually be able to contribute, and that no amount of technology was going to solve that one. It was going to be entirely a care-based activity. And so one of the things I think that's been quite positive in some areas has been the way that we've been turned back on care quite specifically by crisis, but also just the huge yawning gap that has been revealed now, and how we address that, whether we want to become more digital, as people are saying, this idea that people are going to stay working from home. But again, every time anything like this happens, it's just driving a new wedge between the people for whom that's easy and the people for whom it's going to be nigh impossible. And in some ways, I'm quite becoming, as somebody who actually, went into human-computer interaction to understand what computers do to people and with people, becoming more and more critical of any kind of technology enhancement, because it always creates a new digital divide, and it always leaves people behind. And I don't see that we can bring everybody up, because there's always something else.
Thank you. Marcia, politically, I was going to hand over to you actually, because so politically, what should be some moves that we think of so that we don't get into the cycle of digital?
I couldn't agree more on everything that has been said. And but when Anne was talking about COVID, I think there is a point. Here in Denmark things were okay, but in Italy, my home country, it was very tough. And there were, I think, a couple of things that I want just to share and put on the table. One thing is that people my age, so around 40, we were all busy doing all the working from home and taking care of kids with Zoom calls and everything. But the interesting thing was that the younger generation was on one side very careful about respecting the measures, the intense lockdown, but also doing a lot of solidarity measures, like doing the grocery for the elderly in the neighborhood, and all these. There were brigades in the big cities. There were brigades of young people doing the groceries for the elderly, and that was, for example, technology facilitated, because they could organize who is going to whom, and in a moment in which actually you were forced. At the time in Italy, you couldn't go more than 200 meters from your place of living, except to go to the supermarket. So those were the rules. So was and so there needed to be that, to say that I agree with Anne. There is the more we study technology, the more you can say, okay, no, stay away from it. But on the other side, this thing is there. If we look at the EU, basically all the biggest chunk of the research money is all going to AI and all this kind of stuff. So the point is, for me, the politically is really building the capacity to keep up, not to be anytime overwhelmed. And that implies both the research and this kind of example, like the brigades and so on, because those small communities often struggle. They lack resources. They're often based on a lot of voluntary work, and this is the easiest one to go when you're having difficulties. So there is a lot there in trying to build. What I try to do is, when I do projects with those community, I try to give them money. I try to build with them something that they can use beyond when let's say my paid work is done. I haven't mentioned, I just put some screenshot in the slide, but in one of the projects I've done recently called Common Fair, we have actually built an association, and we are still working with these communities, even if we are not getting money from it now. But this we are keeping up, because there is a necessity of a long-term relation. because it means going together, let's say, in somehow. Or each one on his respective, let's say, keep direction, but it's really an act of commoning in itself, being making things together, and with the idea of being together for a while.
Thank you. I'm what I'm really struck by with all those answers is that, all those responses, is that it's about being the change. And I think that is really, there's a really strong element in that, in being the change and networking and building capacity in whatever ways we can. And that's a really important point, I think, for us all to take away. Amazingly, we're coming towards the end of the panel. The time has just flown by. I wondered whether there were any last points that anybody feels that they'd like to make, and any last points from our participants that they want to put in the chat. Was there any last comments? Ruth, yes.
It just, a point that struck me as I was listening to everyone talking was just how we have two sides of the same coin, being digital exclusion on the one side and digital colonialism on the other, and that these somehow sit in relationship under capitalism, and that it feels like somehow they go together, because the way the kind of like new techs are so dependent on this kind of idea of kind of massive scaling up and universal application, but where the mass of people left out aren't considered. And I just feel like there's something there that requires constant consideration, like the relationship between these two things.
Anyone like to add? Yes, Tawanna, go ahead.
I just, I want to say, thank you again for the invitation, and it's been an honor to be with you all here today. Thanks to everyone who asked questions. I'm kind of struck with Ruth's having artists rethinking the blockchain, and part of our work is having regular people rethinking economies, right? Like alternative economies. And I'm just going to pose a question for the panel. What are methods? Maybe this is to you, Ruth. What are the approaches that you've taken with artists rethinking the blockchain, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the things that we've done is very consciously brought. So we ran a series called Decentralized Autonomous Organization with Others. And it was a series, so DAOO is the acronym. And this was basically a series of events that would bring together people across disciplines and different cultural backgrounds. So across business, research, art, and then quite often using design methods or artistic methods like role play and like agile methods of design to look at the potentials for the blockchain and the possible hazards of the blockchain through these different lenses. So we did one for like doing good on the blockchain was one. Another was another one we ran a 3-hour LARP called What Will It Be Like When We Buy an Island on the Blockchain? And this was to think about what different kind of political complexions might be produced because of the way the technology is. But by having people from very different backgrounds, you get to learn fast about what might go wrong, and kind of what the affordances of these technologies are, like where they're likely to go, and how people are likely to think about them, and those we found really useful. And then most recently we've run prototyping. So we've run these Art World blockchain prototype projects with working with a kind of intersection of arts institutions and then community groups in different, actually we had one in Johannesburg in South Africa. We worked with a group in Hong Kong and another in Minsk. So really, again, trying to do this bottom up, like having these different kind of community drives, motivations and needs shape the way people think about the technology, and hopefully so that it doesn't just become the domain of a very narrow group of people with a very particular way of thinking about the world.
Thank you.
Direct challenge to digital capitalism, which is great again in action. Pitso, yes, any last?
Yes, again, also thank you for the opportunity, and thanks for this wonderful talk. I've certainly learned a lot. And maybe just my last parting shot is, I mean, as I remain an optimist for technology, a techno-optimist of sorts. I think technology does in itself hold a lot of promise for the world, and I think it's something that if we get it right, it will enable faster development and faster improvement of people's lives, and as a result, I do not want to see it as something that must be thrown out in order to rethink the world. It's something that's so powerful, but we need to be at all times just be cognizant of all of these other things that it comes with, and we just need to remain sensitive. I mean, with COVID, we've realized the amount of social alienation that that can in a way result in unintended consequences. When people are left with technology on Facebook, and what Facebook can, what ideas Facebook itself of this machine can do to their minds, and they can actually act it out and try to overthrow governments, for instance. So we need to be aware of that and be sensitive to all of this darker, side of technology as we do it, with the idea that if we corrected these things, if we applied our collective wisdom as humans and our connectedness, we will be able to imagine or reimagine a better world.
Thank you. And Maurizio, any last points as we go? Yes.
Yeah, I'm going. I mean, I'm not a techno pessimist, but I do think that we get the technology that reflects the values of the society, but then it also creates the values of the society. So I think the thing that really needs to happen is a little bit more savviness about the direction that we're heading in with the way that we're going, and some kind of I think our speakers yesterday was talking of red lines of things that we just shouldn't be doing. And to me, there are starting to be some very apparent red lines where we need to pull back, but I don't know whether we've got the political power to pull back. So those are the questions. If we want social justice, we have to enshrine it, as people have been saying.
Thank you. Maurizio, any parting?
Yeah, yes. I agree with what Anna said, but I will try to answer Tawanna's question now. What method do you use? How do we do it? And what I've been trying to do together with my colleagues, in particular, Mela Bettiga in Madeira in Portugal, has been engage long moments of ethnographic work, engage with people to figure out in communities what they want, what is they are concerned with, not what I am concerned with, what they are concerned with. And then say, okay, in this picture, we know a little bit about technology. What do we know? Can we try to propose something? Then propose very modestly. And Mela is doing amazing work because she has spent a lot of time with this group of people, and then say, okay, this is what we can do. Do you think it makes sense for you? And being very modest. At the end, when we write papers, we shouldn't be so modest, or at least we are told not to. But the reality is that when we talk to people, we should remember that we need from many point of view, professionally, we need them much more than Dengue does. And that should be reflected in acknowledging that there is no title that holds. At the end is people talking to people and trying to do things together. And
what a fantastic way to finish. That is just that's a great point to take with us. I think we are up on time. I'd like to thank the panelists for giving time and for putting thought into provocations, and for a delightful conversation that certainly given me a lot to think about, and I'm sure everybody. I'd like to thank participants who've been here and engaged and also thought and reflected, and it's just how these ideas will then percolate and go on in the summer school for the rest of the week and beyond. Anne and Clara, I'd like to thank you for running the summer school, for putting it together, and for putting together this really exciting webinar series. And of course to Jonathan and the team that have sort of magically made this happen. I wish everybody a good rest of day and a good evening.
And thank you for some lovely sharing.
And as always, it's a pleasure. And and so we'll leave it there, and look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you.